In today's news, the Social Security Board is under major heat in light of COVID-19.
Tips on how to effectively work from home. These and more stories when 284 News returns.
Is business slow, cash flow down, hosting an upcoming event? We can help. Advertise with 284 Media and take your business or event to the next level by enhancing your present marketing and messaging strategies. Allow our team of experts to create a personalized ad that sets your business apart from all the rest. This could be your business or event. So, what are you waiting for? Contact our marketing team at 284media@cctbvi.com. Advertising with us works.
Welcome, everybody. It's Monday, April 7th, 2020. I am Kyla Kenesha Forbes.
And I am Javon Wilson. That is actually Tuesday. I know this coronavirus is affecting all of us differently.
It's just day after day. We're not sure exactly if it's Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday. But it is Tuesday, April 7th. Everybody, welcome.
Welcome to another edition of 284 News. Now, Kyla, we're following a lot when it comes to COVID-19 coronavirus, and especially on the international scene today. We have to date 1,282,000 cases, 931 that's confirmed cases, and again to date we have 72,744 deaths. Now over 3,000 confirmed cases in the Caribbean. I'm sure quite a number of deaths as well, but to date again in the British Virgin Islands only 3 confirmed cases of the novel coronavirus as we continue to monitor things on the local, regional and international scene.
Most definitely, Javon. I'm definitely blessed to be here in the British Virgin Islands, just praying for the entire world as we go through this global pandemic.
All right, viewers, we're going to head straight into it, topping our newscast today. Now, in the absence of a stimulus plan to date, the residents of the Virgin Islands have been looking to institutions like the Social Security Board for a temporary bailout in light of the novel coronavirus. Now, many companies across the BVI, as you know by now, has begun laying off employees, some company-wide, and others have reduced hours, leaving hundreds, possibly thousands, to fend for themselves in the absence of job security. Now, just last week, the Premier compassionately asked landlords across the territory to restrain from evicting tenants. And Kyla, I can speak positively to my landlord, Mr. Penn, who has exercised that type of leniency, and a few others, but many tenants across the BVI are now left with no choice but to pay up. Now, in light of the financial difficulties, many have turned their attention to the Social Security Board. Now, within our jurisdiction, viewers, private employees pay about 8.5% of insurable earnings to the board. Employees cover about 4%, and employees cover 4%, and our employers cover 4.5%. Civil servants, we see 7.5%, with 3.5% being contributed by the civil servant, and government covering about 4%. Self-employed persons and voluntary contributors contribute about 8.5% and 7% respectively. However, even within the safety and confines of those monthly payments, Social Security does not, and I repeat, does not cover unemployment benefits. According to the advisory outlined here, the benefits administered are sickness, maternity, employment, injury, invalidity, age, funeral, and survivors' benefits. Now, this was further clarified by the director of the board, Mrs. Antoinette Skelton, who said, quote, "The Social Security Board is a preacher of law, and legislation says exactly what the Social Security can pay. There is no provision in the law for unemployment benefits." Now, in light of those statements, Kyla, we reached out to Finance Minister Honorable Andrew A. Foy, who responded and said, "The Social Security Board has the authority to ensure the necessary recommendations to amend the legislation that governs them to accommodate any unforeseen eventuality. This is an unprecedented era, so all hands are needed on deck in a proactive mode. The government will continue to be proactive in the best interest of the Virgin Islands." So, Kyla, we see here on one hand, the government is saying that the board has responsibility to make those recommendations, but that was conflicted by the chairman of the board, who said, Mr. Ian Smith, who said that the board has made several submissions to succession governments with an aim to examine the possibility of the very employment insurance we're talking about today. But seemingly there has been a reluctance to cement a plan. Mr. Smith expressed that it was examined with the possibility of an increased cost on the populace, but he said, quote, "The powers that be have chosen not to pursue it," end of quote. Kyla, clearly a lot of back and forth here on these comments, but surely the Social Security Board is clearly under some serious heat. But for me, this is the real predicament. We have to look at the fact that the money is not fungible. You cannot take money that was signed on for a particular reason and reallocate it to something else, as you know, as is being proposed in this case. These are contracts when we think about it. So while yes, the monies may be available via the Social Security Board, it is for perpetuity, you know, to be inherited by the sole persons who signed on from the beginning. So arbitrarily, you really cannot decide to use it for something else other than what it was signed up for. I think an option we might want to consider, however, in this case, is for us to maybe create a separate fund or agency for unemployment benefits and have them borrow a loan from the Social Security Board. But even then, they'll have to show how they'll be able to repay it. But as a population, I think simply expecting the Social Security Board to pay out certainly isn't going to happen, not at least until those legislative changes are made here in the BVI.
Most definitely. As you said earlier, Javon, we see here where there's a lot of pointing fingers and who should and who should not. And I think just at this point, we're just seeing where the population is looking to just someone, anyone, for help, maybe unaware who might be the one or the authority, that is the actual one to put forward or to help. As you said earlier, there's no stimulus in place right now, and I think that's what we really have to look at this point. You also spoke about, and that's really a really good recommendation, about putting maybe a board or some sort of committee together that can actually borrow that money from the Social Security, knowing how they would put it back, because as you said before, it is there for a reason. But I think just the underlying factor about it is that people are hurting and they are looking for answers somewhere.
Yeah, people, and they need answers. I mean, we are in the beginning of the month. A lot of persons are now forced to decide between whether to pay their bills or you know, keep that money for food or other more immediate expenses. Yeah. And like I said, some landlords have been lenient, but not all, that has not been the case. And of course, expectingly so, because banks have not been advised or put measures in place to give some type of leniency even to persons who have mortgage payments.
Well,
so
really, a lot of banks locally have been speaking about moratoriums. So that is something that landlords can look into. Of course, there's no legislation really speaking to that,
support that,
and to make sure and ensure that landlords are being lenient in these times, unfortunately. And we've seen it throughout this whole crisis, where persons are not being generous or considerate, and basically just using this as an opportunity. So some banks are giving moratoriums, but hopefully an answer is given soon. I think the uncertainty and the amount of time that this may actually go on for, this is the issue with the general public.
Certainly, and we also have to examine the fact too, Kyla, that we live in a disaster-prone region, and while a natural disaster might be a bit different, it's quite still similar when you compare the effects of coronavirus to the effects of those natural disasters we've been forced to face in the past. And so in light of this, I think it's about time that our legislation is revised to make provisions for times like these disasters, where persons' lives, their livelihoods are affected, their jobs, their ways of making money. And of course, that lends positively to the economy and keeping our economy going. So we have to find more strategic ways. And I think the time is definitely now. We are at a juncture where we need to decide where to go, and I think some of those concrete changes need to be in place sooner rather than later.
I do agree, Javon. So now just some news from right across the water in the USVI. The USVI are putting more measures in place to help curb the spread of the COVID-19 virus. Now, Governor Bryant announced just yesterday that beaches will be closed until April 20th. The Virgin Islands National Guard, VI Police, and the Department of Public Works and National Resources are enforcing the beach shutdown. Also, Javon, we see where schools in the USVI will remain closed throughout April 30th. Now, after the territory had its first death, it was definitely a turning point in the fight against the novel coronavirus. This weekend, a 85-year-old St. Thomas resident died from the virus, Javon. The U.S. Virgin Islands, which has reported 42 cases to date, has also reported that 34 of those cases have recovered from the virus. And if we could just speak about that a little bit more, Javon, I think we see the numbers climbing. And of course, it's very scary with St. Thomas being right across the waters from us. This is our neighbors, and 42 is a very high number. But we also have to realize that the recovery rate is very, very, very good over in the USVI. That is 34 out of the 42 cases.
Definitely, Kyla. Recently, we came across an article that spoke to those numbers and the fact that the USVI currently marks the highest rate of recovery.
Exactly.
But even across the world, I know when international experts begun examining the novel coronavirus and the effects, looking at the infection rates, confirmed cases, deaths, and so on, the recovery rate earlier on was 94%.
Right.
And that number, unfortunately, has decreased to 80%, but it still speaks volumes to the recovery rate and the positives that we should be focusing on.
Definitely. I think 80%, although it has dropped from 94, 80% is still a very high recovery rate. Of course, over in the USVI, that is a significantly good news at a time when other islands in the region are showing very sparse recovery rates compared to the infection rates. Other territories in the Caribbean, although they may have lower amount of infections of the virus, the recovery rate is not as good as we're seeing over there in the U.S. Virgin Islands.
And for me, these are the things we want to examine. We want to look at the countries who have these specific models and examine what are they doing?
What are they doing right?
Right. What are they doing right? I know I think one of the first countries to recover within the region as well, as it relates to recovery, was St. Lucia.
Yes.
And this is something we want to look at. We want to ensure that while our situation in the BVI is not relatively as close to the extremes in other countries, we want to ensure that we're following an effective model per se.
I think we can all learn from each other. We're all going through the same thing, something that's generally new. So learning from our neighbors, our neighboring islands in the Caribbean, nothing is wrong with that. So over in the USVI, 6 cases are active and being closely watched by the Department of Health. Now, viewers, still ahead, the Premier speaks against domestic abuse, and we have some tips on how to remain productive while working at home. This and so much more when 284 News returns.
Some claim that the age of a true gentleman is far behind us, but here at 284 Media, we disagree. He may appear in different guises today, but the values and ideals that make him a gent still stand. 284 Media proudly presents its newest talk show, The Art of a Distinguished Gentleman, with yours truly, Ron Grant. A show poised to help guide modern-day men into 21st century distinguished gentlemen. Don't worry, it's not all about suits and bow ties, but raw, real-life lessons that translate to grounded, community-minded, well-rounded men. The Art of a Distinguished Gentleman, a 284 Media production.
Viewers, welcome back to 284 News. Now, the Premier and Minister of Finance, Honorable Andrew A. Foy, is appealing to abusers in the territory to stop committing the heinous act. The Premier said, quote, One of those weak links that has come to my attention is that we have a small pocket of abuse at home, Premier Foy said, adding, quote, worse yet, where it does exist, our males are being reported to be the ones at fault. The Premier, while speaking to the men on the territory during the COVID-19 update on April 6th, called on them to stop the abuse. He said, this cannot be. You cannot be abusing our females. It is wrong. You cannot be abusing our children. It is wrong. God did not put you in a role where you are to be abusive. You are there to build stronger homes and stronger families, not to be a stronger monster. This type of behavior will not be tolerated, whether it be sexual abuse, physical abuse, mental abuse. Do not abuse. Now, Honorable Premier Foy also encouraged family bonding and self-development as a means to pass the time during the 24-hour lockdown. He urged families to pray more, to talk, resolve their differences, and to love more. Premier Foy said, quote, while you are at home, get to know each other. Let us now turn our houses into our homes, because a house is only four walls, but a home is where peace and positive relationships thrive. Read your Bible or a good book. Let us encourage each other, get each other through this mentally, physically, socially, emotionally, and spiritually. The Premier added that when COVID-19 has ended, the BVI would have conquered the virus and all the negativity will be gone from the territory. He said there will be better relationships, stronger bonds, a stronger relationship with God, and a stronger economy. Closing, he said, I want to encourage us to take care of each other so that we all cross the finish line together, he urged, adding that, as your Premier, I pray to God under your government's watch that we do not lose a single soul in the BVI to COVID-19. For us to get that done, all of us must obey the measures that are being put in place for our safety. Now, Kyla, unfortunately, the issue of abuse, this is a lot more prevalent in our community than we'd like to admit here. But in no way, I want to remind us, in no way it is individual to us here in the BVI. Across the world, police have seen a drastic increase in domestic violence calls. A lot of people are saying, it's stress-induced. Persons are focusing on the fact that just the financial stress alone can create a ticking bomb for some families with a history of domestic violence. And unfortunately, Kyla, many of the cases that we've been seeing happening or hearing about is actually happening in front of our children. And often the children become victims of abuse and assault. So this is definitely a growing social ill that we've been trying to curb in the BVI, but especially now post-lockdown, we're seeing an increase in it. And certainly, this is an area for concern. So I'm really happy to see the Premier of the Virgin Islands taking a really firm stance against it, Kyla.
Most definitely. Javon, since the global pandemic and since all over the world, we're seeing lockdowns, and the topic of abuse have continue to rear its head. Mm-hmm. As you mentioned, now in such a stressful time,
yes,
this would now basically we are seeing abuse more and more, and mm-hmm. we're hearing reports about it. But at the end of the day, it didn't start now. Of course, it is highlighted more so now because persons are stuck in the homes with their abusers. But I'm hoping that as soon as we are out of this, and even if we could help them now, to help the victims of abuse who are dealing with this at this time, we are now seeing that this is a major problem in our community, and it's something that we can't continue to let happen.
Definitely. We have to be each other's keepers. I know, just today I tried reaching out to the Royal Virgin Islands Police Force just to get some statistics on those recent reports. And as we speak, those numbers are forthcoming. But just based on the preliminary reports, Kyla, and the fact that the Premier has taken such a strong stance against it, I think it is safe to say that we have seen an increase here in the BVI, and alarmingly so. And, this is another reason, even now, why we're thankful for organizations like the Family Support Network, who has come forward and is asking persons, because they're knowledgeable on the fact that, being in close proximity can lead to stressful situations, especially when you're forced into a lockdown in light of the crisis that we're facing.
Most definitely.
You know, there's going to be a lot of conflict, but what the premier organizations like FSN and other persons across the territory are appealing to persons to do is to find a resolve within the problem. You know, I always like to go back to a very popular quote, Kyla. It says, in chaos, there is opportunity, or even in chaos, there is opportunity. And this is an opportunity for us to really take 2 steps back to reflect on what we're doing right and what we're doing wrong, what we'd like to improve, and to really work on mastering self. And I think as we continue to do that, we will be better persons to the people around us. And so again, viewers, if you are in any situation, if you are in a vulnerable position, whether you be a child or an adult who is subjected to any form of abuse, you are encouraged to reach out to the Family Support Network on the flyer that we listed before. The number is listed there. You could also get that information on their Facebook page as well. And please just continue to live in love through this crisis.
But also, too, we want to speak to neighbors. Any persons who are aware of abuse in a home or a neighbor or someone nearby, be sure to be your brother and sister's keeper. As you said before, Javon, reach out to the police or the authorities, because we cannot continue to let this happen. We cannot continue to turn a blind eye to this.
Certainly, and you know, I'm really glad you brought that point up, because we interviewed Mr. Kendall Bob, who is the inspector overseeing child abuse at the Royal Virgin Islands Police Force. And one of the things I learned in that interview a few months ago is the fact that if you do know of a situation where a child is being abused and fail to report it, you actually can be charged or face jail time. So it's a very serious issue, and we all have responsibility for each other. You know, we like to look at the other person and say, oh, well, that's person's business.
That's not my business.
Right, but
it does not concern me, but it definitely does, especially now during these crucial times. No one would like to be in that situation where you are locked down with your abuser.
Certainly not.
Most definitely. So as we move on now, Javon, just today, I'm going to tell you a little bit about an interview that I conducted with Mrs. Serby Williams. She is a human resources professional, and she offered some tips on how to effectively work from home.
Nice.
Now, Javon, this is something that a lot of persons have had to just kind of dive into. Some persons, you know, it is a norm for them, but normally in the BVI, this is not something that we practice regularly.
Right.
So here are some of the tips to just help these persons who may find it a bit hard to concentrate at home. So firstly, we're starting with ensuring you have the basic needs. And I think this is important because, yes, we're thinking about work, but you have to make sure that you have food and water, and to make sure that you are comfortable during this time. Just starting with the basics. Then 2, holding weekly team meetings, planning meetings with your family. So just how you have team meetings at work, you have to make sure that now you have team meetings with the persons in your household, because
I like that one.
yeah, because you're now working around each other's schedules. So if your kids, if you do have kids, have Skype meetings or meetings with their teachers, or you might have a meeting, all being on the same page is really, really important. Then we have 3, adjust or develop daily routines to best fit your new schedule. Of course, it's not the same schedule that you were normally on. Your daily routine have changed. So now make sure that you adjust and develop a daily routine. Don't just kind of beep and bob and kind of figure it out, but make sure that you actually make a routine for this new type of innovative living.
And certainly, I really like that one, Kyla, to fit the news schedule, and why that is so important. We've been seeing, you know, we can admit to an increase in our viewership just over the last few weeks, and simply because not only because people are at home, because people generally want to know what's going on, not only on the local, but also the regional and international scene as it relates
Yes.
to the COVID-19 virus. So as much as you're working from home, it's imperative that you stay aware and ahead of what's going
happening.
on across the world.
Most definitely. So at number 4, we have identify a workspace. Of course, some of us might be tempted to work from our beds, but that might not be the best place and the most productive place. So maybe you can find a desk, maybe it might be the dinner table. Once it's a quiet area where you can get down and into your work. 5, remove distractions. So just as though how at work you might not be on your phones as much, you might not be on social media, or we spoke a little bit about developing a daily routine. So if you have kids, you might want to fit your work time into their nap time. That might be something that might work for you. At number 6, we have communicate with your work team regularly. So although you are working from home, it is you are still a part of a work team. Thankfully, Javon, we here at 284, we are regularly in communication, but some people not so much. But I think this is something that could definitely help. You're being in contact with your work team. It keeps you accountable and it keeps you aware of where each other is at.
And it really strengthens your power as a unit, because as much as we're working remotely, we are still working towards one
common
goal
goal.
and yes, one vision. So it's important that constant communications, of course, will complement that, and like you said, holding each other accountable for our various delegated tasks.
I do agree. And then number 7, we have a lot time for fun and family time. You don't want to forget that, viewers. At the end of the day, you are at home, and you don't have to stick to the normal rigid schedule. This is a time and an opportunity to spend with your family and to love on your family and just create a peaceful environment. So don't forget to allot that time for fun and family.
I love that one.
Yeah,
I love that one because you and I can both attest to the fact, and I'm sure tons of persons across the BVI, working from home is really not as easy as it seems. As a matter of fact,
luxurious,
yes. As a matter of fact, you probably might be putting in more hours. So I see the importance of being very strategic with your time, even within the house. I'm guilty of being carried away with just being on the news or writing stories or indulging, consuming information, and not focusing on other, aspects of personal life. And it's important, especially in this time, for our mental sanity, for us to create a healthy balance that is going to keep us not only productive, but happy and healthy as well.
Most definitely. And Javon, this is something that some places, some organizations have practiced even before the pandemic, but this is actually a new norm for some persons, and it might actually be a step in the right direction.
I do believe that, and I love it. I think, like I mentioned yesterday via Brent's interview, we have been forced into a new direction. And I use the word forced because it's so unprecedented. We're living in strange times. But we really have to look at all the positives that will come out of this. And I feel like, we have countries across the world, like, for example, in Europe, where they have shortened physical working hours in the office because of the restraints of having to sit in one place and the health effects that comes from stuff like that. So being able to do this remotely, I think, will really improve issues like that, and also show that we are a lot more flexible in what we do and our ability to move around.
I agree, and I'm hoping that employers become more open to this new reality. It does have some advantages for to working remotely. So I'm hoping that this might be a new reality that we can actually explore. So viewers, of course, I said that this is actually a part of a full interview with Mrs. Serby Williams. So be sure to look out for that. And also, Mrs. Williams she actually spoke to employers in her article, which was posted on LinkedIn. The article is entitled Leading Remotely and Compassionately. So if you're having any struggles with working remotely, make sure to tap into those resources. Yeah, most definitely, Javon.
All right, viewers, that is it for today's news roundup. Be sure to follow us for daily updates at 284media.com. You can also like us on Facebook at 284media, as well as 284BVI on Instagram, as well as Twitter. My name is Javon Wilson.
And I am Kyla Kenesha Forbes. We'll see you again tomorrow as we deliver a daily dose of local, regional, and international content. 284 News, your source for honest and impartial news right here on 284 Media. Have a happy Tuesday, everybody.